10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange world. Some time back, we were talking about the political situation back in Turkey, especially in Istanbul, and what all you faced, the kind of pressure you had to go through. You were talking about in one of the interview about that cemetery in Istanbul where the companionless people were buried. And in this novel as well, you talk about a sex worker and the way her life was eliminated. What kind of research or preparation goes while writing such narratives, while weaving such narratives? Because there's clearly, we can see the political allegiance of Elif Shafak, where she is with all the marginalized people, whether you are from LGBTQ community, where you are being suppressed by any kind of authority, you sympathize with them, you empathize with them, actually, that's the right word. So especially in context of this novel, how was the preparation? Because when I read about it, that cemetery, I was like, okay, so many numbers, so many possible stories, each graveyard, but nobody is paying attention to them. And that happens always around us.
Yeah, absolutely. So this novel, 10 minutes, 38 seconds in a strange world, tells the story of a sex worker. And right away, we know that she's dead on the very first page, you know. But the interesting thing is, even though her heart has stopped beating, her mind is still functioning for a few more minutes. There are interesting scientific studies that show after the human heart stops, the brain can remain active for up to 10 minutes. And that gave me the structure for the entire novel. So I was inspired by science. But I particularly wanted to focus on this cemetery where she ends up being buried. This is an actual cemetery in Istanbul on the outskirts. It is not the only one. And in Turkish, we call it the cemetery of the companionless, people who did not have a companion in life. But that's not true. The people who were buried there did have companions. They did have friends. So this is also a book about friendship. Now, I became very interested in the cemetery many years ago. I visited it, and since then, I've been trying to do research, and every time I could find the newspaper coverage, I kept it. It's a very sad place where actual human beings are almost dumped without a proper funeral, without any rituals or burial rites, and where actual human beings are turned into numbers. There are no tombstones there. There are no flowers, no visitors. You do not read the names of the people who are buried there. They have only become just scribbled numbers. And I think I wanted as an author to do the exact opposite. Can I take at least one of these numbers and rehumanize someone who has been dehumanized like that, and give her a story and give her friends and show that she was not companionless? If you go to this cemetery in Turkey, and if you do some research, you will find out that the people who are buried there, they come from all backgrounds. So for instance, among them, there are so many people who were buried throughout 1980s and 1990s who died because of HIV-related diseases. And because of the stigma of AIDS, their families rejected them, and so they ended up buried in the cemetery of the companionless. There are also sex workers there, buried, but there are also, for instance, babies who were found on the street and who lost their lives. So abandoned babies are also there. Suicides are there. There's a growing number of refugees. We always read about refugees who have lost their lives as they were trying to cross into Europe. Where are those bodies buried? They're buried in the cemetery of the companions. So it's a very surreal place in which an Afghan refugee might be buried next to an abandoned baby, might be buried next to a sex worker, and so on. And I think my instinct was to, first of all, to pay attention to this space that almost no one talks about, that is so discarded and forgotten. And I wanted to show that sometimes we have, yes, of course, we have our blood families. And if our families are loving and caring and tender, we should all count our blessings. but not everyone is as lucky. And especially for people who have been pushed to the margins, the second family can be just as important as the blood family. And I call the second family our water families. Our water families are composed of our friends, sometimes 5 or 6, maybe not more. It can't be dozens and dozens, but these are the people who know us, who love us, and they are the witnesses of our journeys. When we fall down, they pull us up, and we do the same for them. So my observation is, especially in countries like Turkey, where lots of minorities, particularly LGBTQ plus minorities, are pushed to the periphery, especially for them, water families are so important. And I also want to talk about that.